A few weeks ago, I set about the task of constructing a timeline that integrates our new discoveries in Horizon Forbidden West with the existing timeline of Zero Dawn. The task seemed simple at first, just 5 minutes of putting a few numbers together and seeing what came out. But what came out didn't make sense. And this led me down a rabbit hole of discovery, going beyond even what the writers ever intended for us to know. I emerged from this multiple-week spiral of madness with a timeline with answers to questions I did not believe could be answered, even the question of when in the timeline the next Horizon game will take place. And the clue that set it all in motion is hidden in plain sight. This is the moment where I have to pause and tell you that if you care about spoilers, it's time to stick the video into your watch later list to come back to once you've completed the main story of Forbidden West, because I will be spoiling Forbidden West all the way up to and including the final mission. That's your only warning, because the spoilers are going to begin now. What I have discovered is that a mistake in the writing that almost everyone who has played Forbidden West has seen may in fact have let slip the arrival time of Nemesis. When I discovered this, I decided I needed not just a rough timeline, but the most accurate possible timeline I could muster from every relevant clue introduced in Forbidden West. If you just want to see the timeline, you can skip ahead to the relevant timestamp which I'll post below. But if you want to check my working, buckle up, and I'll take you through the thought processes that have consumed my life for the past few weeks. The plot of Forbidden West quickly sets about addressing some of the questions we were left with after Zero Dawn. Between the origins of the mysterious signal and the fate of the Odyssey, by the midpoint of the game we're pretty sure we have a handle on what we're dealing with. Our encounters with the Zeniths and our conversations with GAIA paint a picture of a group of ruthless billionaires of the old world fleeing disaster, working to wipe the Earth clean of its inferior tribal inhabitants. Our meeting with Tilda only seems to reinforce that view, and though certain flaws in the logic may show, it's all we have to work with. Only at the end do we learn the truth. Beta and GAIA were working on incomplete information, and Tilda and Silence were lying. In reality, the Zeniths were in a mad dash across the stars, running from an entity born of their own hubris, Nemesis. In truth, GAIA, Beta, Hades, and even the Earth's biosphere have all been pawns of an elaborate chess game that began decades ago and light years away between machines and immortals. As any good Horizon game should, it left me with its own questions. Some can only be answered in half a decade or so, and we can likely expect the next installment of Horizon. But others could perhaps be found by going back and reanalyzing some earlier details in light of what we now know. In particular, I wanted to construct a timeline of this interstellar proxy war for Earth fought by Nemesis and the Zeniths in deep space. I wondered, exactly how long ago did the Zeniths leave Sirius? When in their journey was Beta created? How fast is Nemesis traveling? There are small clues scattered throughout the game, and even as far back as Zero Dawn, but by far the most important came in Aloy's first conversation with the rebuilt GAIA. Several different parts of this conversation present us with some hard numbers, which combined with the knowledge gained from Tilda in the final mission, can construct a fairly solid picture of how the entire chase across the stars fits into the Horizon timeline. The first is where GAIA explains how she guessed the identity of the Zeniths by the duration of the Extinction Signal.
How did you figure out that the Extinction Signal came from Sirius?
The key came with data on your focus, from Silent's interrogation of Hades. The duration of the signal itself, 17.22 years.
That doesn't make sense. You said that the signal took 8.6 years to arrive from Sirius. Why would the signal keep transmitting after it was received and you blew yourself up?
Because the sender didn't know that had happened until it received notice from Hades.
Which would take another 8.6 years to get back.
Correct. Only then would the sender stop broadcasting, after a total of 17.22 years. So the duration, halved, gave me the distance the signal traveled. With that in mind, I simply scanned my astronomical database for any relevant location 8.6 light-years away. Because it was Far Zenith's intended destination, Sirius was the only logical source.
This information is invaluable in putting together a timeline. Unlike everything else we're working with, the magical value of 8.611 years allows us to narrow things down not just to the day, but to the hour if we want, and it forms the perfect foundation upon which we can build. So, let's begin. Now, I love a good timeline, but why make a timeline when you can make a time graph? The distance between Earth and Sirius is effectively fixed at 8.611 light-years. That means we can create a graph in which the horizontal axis is time in years and the vertical axis is the distance between those planets in light years. Anything traveling at the speed of light, like a signal, will move exactly diagonally, and anything traveling slower will be shallower. For now, we'll simply start this timeline at 0, with 0 being the beginning of the war between Far Zenith and Nemesis. We know that Nemesis took control of the Sirius colony and attempted to kill the Zeniths. Some of them escaped onto the Odyssey and set a course for Earth. In response, Nemesis devised the Extinction Signal and transmitted it to Earth. The purpose of this signal was to turn the subordinate function Hades into an independent AI that would be the agent of Nemesis on Earth. Hades was to have 3 key goals. Firstly, to take control of Gaia and her subfunctions. Then, to wipe out all life on Earth. And finally, to set a trap for the Zeniths should they still attempt to land, complete with the schematics for a device that would disable Zenith shields, which ultimately would be extracted by silence. The signal, of course, travelled at light speed, so it took 8.601 years to reach Earth. Upon arrival, in a matter of microseconds, the subfunctions became independent and Hades attempted to take over. Gaia initiated a self-destruct in order the creation of a clone of Elizabeth Sobek, and Hades fled along with the other subfunctions. In Zero Dawn, we learned that the signal arrived on the 26th of August, 3020. The fact that we know the exact travel time of the signal and the moment of arrival means we can pinpoint when it was sent and where our graph starts. I put it at January 15th, 3012, give or take a day or so. We also know that as a result of this, Aloy was born in the Eleuthionine facility on April 4th, 3021. Happy negative 999th birthday, Aloy! Ultimately, Hades failed at the first hurdle. It then either sent a signal back telling Nemesis of its failure, or simply never sent a reply at all. Either way, a message of success would be expected on Sirius exactly 17.22 years after the Extinction Signal was first sent, and this is not what is received. On roughly April 7th, 3029, Nemesis concludes that Hades has failed, and in order to ensure the Zeniths die, it will have to travel personally to Earth. It also stops transmitting the Extinction Signal, which it had kept transmitting continuously until that moment. As a result, a further 8.611 years later, on roughly the 17th of November 3037, Hades, trapped in a Horus Titan processor core, notes that the signal has stopped. Hades' noted duration of the signal ultimately leads to Gaia deducing the identity of the Zeniths years later. From here on, we depart from concrete numbers and exact dates and venture into the realm of estimations and upper and lower bounds. For some of this, I'll be referring to general consensuses I've gained from the Horizon Wiki, videos of writer interviews, and the occasional bit of good old-fashioned guesswork. Our next big clue, however, comes once again from Aloy's first conversation with Gaia, this time from Gaia's hypothetical travel speeds for the Odyssey.
You said Sirius is really far from Earth.
81 trillion kilometers, or 8.611 light years.
Right. So, how would the descendants have gotten here?
On a spacecraft much like the Odyssey, though significantly more advanced. The journey from Earth to Sirius would have taken the Odyssey almost 300 years. This appears to have been much faster. If their ship departed Sirius at the same moment the Extinction Signal first began transmitting, the journey was made in just 29 years at an average of 0.297 the speed of light. If they did not set out for Earth until they learned of the Extinction Signal's failure, the journey was even faster, a mere 13 years, or 0.662 the speed of light.
Okay, enough. You're making my head spin.
This dialogue is not useful to us because of the speeds, but because of the times. Gaia says that if the Zenith set off when the Extinction Signal was sent and arrived shortly before Aloy's encounter at the Hades Proving Lab, then their journey would have taken 29 years. This locks us into a certain section of the timeline, and can potentially help us nail the first game to the timeline too. Knowing that the signal was sent in January of 3012, depending on how Gaia is rounding it, it is at the absolute earliest the summer of 3040, or at the latest the winter of 3041. The general consensus amongst the writers seems to be that Aloy is 20 years old during Forbidden West, narrowing us down to April 3041 or later, so we can be fairly sure that at the very least, Aloy's first conversation with Gaia is in 3041. We know for a fact that 6 months passed between the end of Zero Dawn and the start of Forbidden West. We can also expect that time has passed during both games. This conversation happens a third of the way into Forbidden West, and by this point Aloy has already travelled from beyond the Sundom back to Meridian, then to the Daunt, bounced around in there for a while killing bristlebacks, learned a board game, defeated the Eclipse again, and so on. Estimations for how much time passes during a Horizon game vary generally between 3 and 6 months. There's also been considerable debate about whether Aloy is 18 or 19 in Zero Dawn, with the game providing figures supporting both arguments. All considered, I'm going to assume that everyone is right. Aloy is both 18 and 19 during Zero Dawn. Aloy canonically hates parties and probably birthdays in general. Considering the circumstances, her birthday happening in the middle of Zero Dawn would have been the last thing on her mind. That puts the start of Zero Dawn in early 3040. 6 months of battling the Eclipse followed by 6 months of searching for Gaia would put the opening sequence of Forbidden West in early 3041. Aloy's 20th birthday then probably happens on top of a mountain somewhere east of the Daunt, in time for the main portion of the game, including her meeting with Gaia. Now, this doesn't actually tell us when Far Zenith arrived on Earth. Gaia's 29 years is a hypothetical that assumes the Zeniths just arrived. So how are we supposed to work out how long they've actually been there? Well, we do have some clues. In the Hades Proving Lab, Aloy performed a scan for Gaia's subfunctions. What Silence was undoubtedly relieved that Aloy didn't notice is that on that scan, the Far Zenith base is clearly visible, apparently fully assembled. While this doesn't nail down an exact date, it tells us that by the time we meet them, they are well established on Earth. It's entirely possible that they've been on Earth for several years already, though at a certain point you would expect the news to have gotten out. I'm going to put their arrival on exactly 29 years, in line with Gaia's hypothetical figure, for 2 reasons. Firstly, based on the timeline we've worked out for the games, that would mean the Zeniths have been on Earth for at least 4 months by the time of Aloy and Gaia's conversation, which I expect occurred sometime within a month or so after Aloy's 20th birthday. The second reason, I'll come to later. Ultimately, I could be entirely wrong and the Zeniths could have been on Earth or in orbit for years already. As for their departure time from Sirius, one thing we can be pretty sure of is that the Extinction Signal was sent after they departed. Based on what little understanding of Nemesis we have, I'm inclined to think that the signal was devised in a matter of weeks at most and minutes at least, putting the departure time at pretty much the same time as the signal was first transmitted. However, it is possible that that's also entirely incorrect. For all we know, the Odyssey might have set off years, even decades earlier, with the Extinction Signal taking much longer to perfect. We know the original journey was expected to take 300 years, and the Odyssey might have been upgraded since then, but maybe 0.3 the speed of light is still beyond them. Or maybe they never upgraded it, and in truth their colony lasted a mere 400 years before they turned around for another 3-century journey home. Going with our best guesses for departure and arrival, and assuming a constant speed, we can add the Odyssey to our timeline, and find a potential answer to one of our questions. How old is Beta? We know that somewhere on the way to Earth, the Zeniths hatched their plan to steal Gaia with a clone of Elizabeth Sobek. But when? If they'd devised the plan immediately, Beta could have been as many as 8 years older than Aloy, but if anything, she appears younger. Presumably, the older Beta was and the more time she had to learn from Apollo, the better for the Zeniths, and so as soon as the plan was made, they would want to create the clone. And so I believe that for the first leg of their journey, the Zeniths had the same plan as Nemesis: wait for the result of the Extinction Signal, and hope. Then, when they learned that the signal failed and they weren't heading for a dead Earth, the plan came together. This is why we need not just a timeline, but a time graph. By graphing out the positions of signals and objects in space between the 2 planets, we can use the intersections of these paths to determine when certain signals are picked up by certain objects. And so we can see that by our current estimations, the Odyssey would learn of Hades' failure in early 3025. If the Odyssey's ectogenic chambers take 7 months like the ones Zero Dawn created from Far Zenith designs, Beta will be born in late 3025. That would mean, based on our timeline, that when we encounter Beta in the Hades Proving Lab, she would be around 15 and a half. Bearing in mind the potential for our guesses about the Zenith journey to be entirely wrong, this is effectively a lower bound. If the Zenith's departure, arrival, or both were earlier, it would mean they intercepted the signal earlier, and Beta would have been born earlier. But they would have to be earlier by several years for it to make a significant difference. A faster running ectogenic chamber is also a possibility, so this is by no means a conclusive figure, rather the best guess I could make from what we know. As a side note, we can also see that the Zeniths would only have become aware of the end of the Extinction Signal and the launch of Nemesis in the summer of 3034 at the earliest. It's also worth mentioning that at the speeds we're talking about, time dilation would come into play. But personally, I don't think that will have actually factored into the planning of the timeline by the writers. It's an unnecessary complication that, if I was in their position, I would simply ignore, for the sake of simplicity and sanity. You could definitely fit it into the model, but I'll leave that for someone else to try. With that, there is one final thing missing from our timeline: Nemesis. According to Tilda, it launched from Sirius when it learned of Hades' failure, so sometime shortly after it stopped broadcasting the Extinction Signal in 3029. But we have no idea of when it will arrive. Presumably the characters know, based on Far Zenith's data, but it's not mentioned in the final mission or any post-game dialogue. But after the final mission, a new data point appears in the base called Hephaestus Revisited, written by Beta. It talks about bodging together an alternative to Hephaestus that will allow Gaia to stabilize the biosphere within a year. By the way, I'm going to place my bet now that this proto-subfunction will be named Vulcan. Beta remarks that it means they won't die before Nemesis arrives. Assuming she knows the arrival time of Nemesis, that suggests that the original point at which Gaia predicted the biosphere would be beyond saving without Hephaestus will come before the arrival of Nemesis. This takes us once again to Aloy's first conversation with Gaia. When Aloy asks how long the biosphere has, Gaia says they have 4 months without any subfunctions, and a few more with Ether, Demeter and Poseidon. That would bring them to somewhere early in 3042. But all that gives us is a lower bound. However, there is one more clue we can use. By all rights, it should be a throwaway line, at best useful to check you're working against, but instead it serves as a key piece of the puzzle that takes us beyond what the writers intended for us to know. It is this clue that turned this entire endeavor from 5 minutes with some graph paper to a multi-week project to create this video and share this discovery. Remember the hypothetical travel times Gaia mentioned? 29 years if the Zenith set off when the Extinction Signal was sent, 13 years if they set off when they learned of Hades' failure. Here's the thing. That doesn't add up. The difference between those numbers is 16, and it should be 17.22. If the Extinction Signal was sent 29 years ago, it takes 8.61 years for it to get to Earth, and then 8.61 years for Sirius to find out, for a total of 17.22 years. And that is only 11.78 years ago. You need to round it up to even reach 12, never mind 13. No matter how you massage the numbers, if Gaia uses consistent rules for rounding both numbers, 29 and 13 can never both be correct. Which means it's a mistake. Not on Gaia's part, these are calculations for which an abacus would be overkill. This is a mistake by the writers. In the main plot, no less. How could this have happened? Everything else added up so well so far, even better than it ever did in Zero Dawn. Wouldn't they have double-checked these numbers? Where did they go wrong? I have a theory. Considering how well the rest of the numbers fit together, I believe that someone in Guerrilla Games did everything I've done here, but effectively in reverse. They graphed it all out, made sure it worked, and stretched the times that needed stretching to make it all fit. And rather than present their colleagues with some ridiculous graph or timeline to work off of, they worked out some key dates and times and listed them for easy reference. And amongst those times were the rough figures for the journey times of the Odyssey and Nemesis, and those times were 29 years and 13 years. Then, someone had the neat idea to include a branch of dialogue in which Gaia theorized on the potential speeds the Zeniths might have traveled to Earth, utilizing those figures. And either they didn't consider the fact that Nemesis had not actually arrived and so their time might be incorrect, or they figured that nobody would be crazy enough to look this deep and find it. Maybe it's even left in there intentionally, and I just want a cookie. Or maybe it was literally just a mistyped figure that made it all the way through to release. But, if I'm right, and these figures were actually the planned journey times for the Odyssey and Nemesis that a writer let slip, then this timeline goes from a series of educated guesses to rock solid. That is the second reason why I put the journey time for the Odyssey at exactly 29 years, and why I'm putting the ETA of Nemesis in April 3042. That's a little under a year after Gaia initially expected the biosphere to have around 7 months without Hephaestus. I can't be exactly sure, of course. 29 and 13 are clearly still rounded figures, so the true values could be sooner or later by a few months, but it's the best guess we can possibly make with the information we have. And it lets us pin a final item to the timeline: Horizon 3. We can't be sure exactly when, but we can reasonably expect that the arrival of Nemesis marks either the start or end of the next Horizon game. I doubt the third game will be called Nemesis, by the way, but for now it's all we have to work with. So, with all the key moments in place, welcome back to those who skipped ahead, and let's summarize the timeline, in chronological order this time. Nemesis gets loose on the Sirius colony, and the Zeniths flee on the Odyssey to Earth. Shortly after, on January 15th, 3012, Nemesis sends the Extinction Signal to Earth to deny the Zeniths a safe harbor. The Zeniths continue anyway, with no other option. The Extinction Signal reaches Earth on the 26th of August, 3020. Hades becomes self-aware, Gaia orders the creation of Aloy and self-destructs, and the subfunctions escape. On April 4th, 3021, Aloy is born, placed outside the Eleuthia 9 facility, and found by the Nora. By the spring of 3025, a reply from Hades, or conspicuous lack thereof, reaches the Odyssey. The Zeniths, knowing Earth will still be there when they arrive, devise a plan to steal Gaia from Earth and escape to a random system Nemesis cannot predict. To speed up the process, they decide to create Beta. By the end of 3025, Beta is born aboard the Odyssey. On April 7th, 3029, Nemesis becomes aware that the Extinction Signal failed. It ceases transmitting, and shortly afterwards, launches from Sirius to destroy the Zeniths personally. By the summer of 3036, the Zeniths are aware that Nemesis has given chase, and on November 17th, 3037, Hades notes the end of the Extinction Signal on Earth. In early 3040, Hades discovers the existence of Aloy, and the events of Horizon Zero Dawn are set in motion. In the 6 months after the defeat of Hades, the Odyssey arrives on Earth and 4 Zenith begin constructing a base of operations and searching for Gaia. In 3041, Aloy travels to the Forbidden West in search of Gaia, encounters 4 Zenith, and ultimately defeats them. And finally, Aloy and her growing team of allies make preparations to face Nemesis, who will reach Earth in 3042. And there we have it. There's definitely a possibility that I'm entirely wrong about half of it, but I've done the best I could to make the most accurate possible timeline from the clues that we have. All I planned for originally was to make a graph to satisfy my own curiosity and use it to answer questions the community had. But as I descended into the rabbit hole of obscure data points, fierce debates between wiki contributors over Aloy's age, and theories about the individual processes of the Guerrilla Games writing team, this ballooned into the massive video project you've reached the end of. I hope you enjoyed my first ever lore video. It was quite fun. I might do some more of these. Over time, undoubtedly, new information will come to light, and holes may get poked in this whole plan. So if you have any questions or contributions, check the description and pinned comment to see if I've covered it since, and if not, I'd love to hear it. And in keeping with the spirit of this video, I do have one more surprise twist for you. I have never in my life, even for a brief moment, actually played a Horizon game. I just really like lore. And with that, I've been Bentham, and I shall say goodbye, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.